All right, everybody, welcome back for another deep dive.
This time we're getting into some pretty interesting territory conspiracy theories.
Yeah,
And this one's coming straight from you guys. Big shout out to the listener who sent in that conspiracyruffins.pdf document. It's definitely a fascinating read, to say the least.
it really is. And you know what jumped out at me right away? That whole comparison the author makes between flat earthers and Gnostics.
Oh, yeah. I gotta admit, that threw me for a loop, too. But before we spiral down that rabbit hole, I think it's important to highlight the author's empathy for conspiracy theorists. They're not just writing them off as kooks. There's this genuine attempt to understand the appeal of these alternative narratives.
Yeah, and I think that's crucial because let's be honest, haven't we all had those moments where the official story just doesn't sit right?
Yeah.
Like there's got to be more to it.
Totally. Like, remember that whole MKUltra thing? That was straight out of a spy movie. And it turned out to be real. So to just dismiss every conspiracy theory as completely bogus seems a bit naive, don't you think?
Absolutely. And the author really hits on something important about human nature. This inherent need to question, to dig deeper, especially when we're bombarded with so much information these days.
Right. Like, who hasn't felt overwhelmed by it all? The news, social media, even just trying to pick a restaurant online. It's exhausting.
Exactly. And that's where the distrust of mainstream information comes in. Suddenly you've got all these conflicting expert opinions, outright misinformation campaigns. It's no wonder people start looking for alternative explanations.
And the author dives deep into that distrust. They talk about bias in the media, how complex issues get oversimplified for mass consumption, even instances of straight-up falsehoods being presented as facts.
It's almost like they see this cult of experts as part of the problem.
Yeah, like we're supposed to blindly trust these authority figures without question, which
Yeah.
honestly is something we all grapple with to some degree, right?
All the time. Think about it. How much faith do you put in online reviews before buying something? Or even health advice from doctors? We're constantly evaluating credibility, even if it's subconsciously.
And you know where the author takes this whole question everything thing?
Where's that?
The flat earth theory?
Okay, yeah, I was wondering when we were going to get to that.
I know, right? Out of all the conspiracy theories out there,
It's a classic.
it is. And you know what I found really interesting? The author actually watched a flat earth documentary for this.
Really? Dedicated research there.
Right. But what struck them wasn't just the arguments themselves, it was the filmmaker's conviction. Like, they genuinely believed what they were presenting.
Okay, so it wasn't just some tongue-in-cheek thing.
Not at all. It was real passionate belief.
Right.
And I think that made it even more surprising when the author ultimately found the theory itself unconvincing.
So they went in with an open mind, but weren't swayed by the evidence.
Exactly. They said it lacked that explanatory power, like it couldn't account for basic things we observe every day.
Like, give me an example.
Well, for starters, how do you explain seasons on a flat Earth? Or eclipses? Or even something as simple as ships disappearing hull first over the horizon?
Right. Those are pretty big things to account for.
Exactly. It's like they were saying, look, I appreciate the impulse to question the mainstream narrative, but you still need a compelling alternative.
It's that balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
Questioning assumptions, demanding evidence, but also being willing to acknowledge when an alternative explanation just doesn't hold water.
It's like those ancient aliens shows.
Oh man, don't even get me started.
Right. Fun to watch, but do they actually explain anything better than existing theories?
Sometimes I wonder if they're even trying to.
Yeah.
But it brings up a good point, because sometimes mainstream science doesn't have all the answers either.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Like that whole thing with dinosaur bones being found with soft tissue still intact.
Yeah, that's a head scratcher.
Right. And that's where these alternative explanations like creationism step in and say, see, what about this? They don't have it all figured out.
Because a little bit of mystery can be pretty enticing.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes you wonder what else might be out there, right? And that's where this whole Gnosticism thing comes in. Gnosticism, flat earth. Gotta be honest, that connection's got me a little lost.
Yeah, it does seem like a bit of a leap, but the author lays out a pretty interesting argument. So Gnosticism, right? It's all about this idea that true knowledge, like real deep truth, is hidden, secret, and only accessible to a select few, the enlightened ones.
Okay, so almost like an exclusive club of knowledge. Is that where they're going with this? Connecting that to people who reject the mainstream narrative.
Exactly. See, they're arguing that while on the surface, something like the flat earth theory might seem like this big rebellion against established authority, ultimately it ends up replicating the same kind of blind faith it's supposedly pushing back against. You're just swapping out one set of authority figures for another.
So it's not really about the Earth being flat or round. It's more about who we choose to put our trust in, even if that means blindly accepting what they say, no questions asked.
That's the heart of it, right? Blind faith in a scientist's explanation is really not that different from blind faith in some YouTube conspiracy theorist. Both sides demand you just accept their word without necessarily questioning where that information's coming from, what biases might be shaping it.
Which brings us back to the importance of critical thinking. And it's not just about rejecting information outright, it's about engaging with it, regardless of whether it fits our existing worldview or not.
And that takes effort, right? Because it's way easier to just take things at face value, especially if it already lines up with what we already believe or want to believe. But the author uses this great phrase. They say, we should all strive to be rational sheep, not just blindly following the flock, but questioning, analyzing, and ultimately thinking for ourselves.
Because let's be real, everyone's got an agenda. Doesn't matter if it's the government, scientists, even our favorite social media influencers. They're all trying to influence us in some way.
And it's our job to be discerning, to look at all sides, weigh the evidence, and then come to our own conclusions. Which, maybe that leads us to agree with the mainstream, maybe it doesn't. It's about the process.
It's about thinking for yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which I guess leads us to a final, maybe kind of unsettling question for everyone listening. If your gut reaction is to just accept or reject information based on what you already believe, are you really thinking critically?
Whoa. Yeah, that's something to chew on. Well, folks, there you have it. Another deep dive in the books. And just remember, questioning everything isn't about being cynical. It's about being engaged, curious, and most importantly, taking responsibility for how we understand this crazy, complicated world around us. Until next time, keep those minds open and keep asking those tough questions.